Hi there, it's been a while. I'm back at making a video response. This time I'm going to take a look at a video by Chen. It's about maps. So Chen was formerly known as Roaming Millennial, and I'm just briefly going to introduce her as this very conservative figure. She's very anti-progressivism, she's anti-SJW, she's anti all kinds of things, but I believe most of all, she's anti-map. She has plenty of anti-pedo videos up. I think I've watched all of them, pretty much, but this is the first time I'm attempting a response to her here on YouTube, so I think it's high time. Lauren's video is basically a critique of this one activist or an ex-professor called Alan Walker. And in case you're not familiar with Alan and the controversy around Alan, I'm just going to finish and wrap up this introduction, like before we move on to the actual response, by reading just a few bits from one article to introduce Alan. A university academic who referred to pedophiles as minor attracted people or MAPs in a book aimed at preventing sexual abuse against children will step down following controversy sparked by the phrase. Alan Walker, who worked at Old Dominion University in Norfolk, Virginia, had been placed on administrative leave on November 16 following an outcry over the term which critics said destigmatized sex offenders. Multiple threats were made against me and the campus community generally, Walker said. Walker's book, Along the Dark Shadow, Minor Attracted People and Their Pursuit of Dignity, was published in June. A description of the book by publisher University of California Press says it disputes the view those attracted to minors are necessarily also predators and sex offenders. However, its publication spurred more than 14,000 people to sign a Change.org petition calling for Walker's ouster. We want to be clear that this is pedophilia and should not be considered a sexual preference, said the petition. I have to stop here because isn't that comment kind of silly? Like, yes, it's pedophilia, but pedophilia means sexual preference to children. When you're saying it's not a sexual preference, you're like saying pedophilia doesn't exist. There are no people who are attracted to children primarily. So that makes no sense to me, but moving on. Amid the controversy over the research, Walker had the support of other academics. More than 60 professors in sexual abuse prevention, mental health, human sexuality, and criminology signed a letter to the ODU's administration defending Walker's important and groundbreaking scholarship. The public backlash reflects a misunderstanding and mischaracterization of Walker's research, the letter said. It added, "We urge you to consider the dire ramifications for academic freedom from removing a professor from their post, because the topic of their research is emotionally charged, uncomfortable to discuss, and difficult to understand." Now, it so happens that not everyone was actually pleased by or thrilled by this aspect, that there would be people supporting Alan during this controversy. So here we have a tweet by none other than Chen. This is what Lauren says. Alan Walker, the professor trying to destigmatize pedophilia, has been placed on leave by ODU. Good news, right? No, not really. But because we live in clown world, there are actually people on this side defending Walker. Please just make it stop. Apparently, according to Lauren, it's clown world when we have individuals who care about things like free speech, academic freedom, who are against cancel culture. Like, I agree with Lauren, we live in a clown world, but for all the different reasons she thinks. For example, Lauren is one of these people of this political side who are always complaining hysterically about the leftists trying to censor her, and here she is celebrating censorship, celebrating this witch hunt and cancel culture. So what sense does this even make? Hemphill is the president of the university, Walker's resignation would be the best way to move forward, and that the safety and security of those on the campus are of the utmost importance. When contacted for comment, the ODU referred Newsweek to its joint media statement by Hemphill and Walker. It also referred to another statement by Hemphill, which said that decisions were made to protect the life and safety of faculty members and others on campus and beyond. So it is clear from this source that there were real threats made against not only Allen, but also against the university community. by the anti-pedophiles, and it's okay for them. This is the way they want to deal with dissent and disagreement. My perspective on this is that it doesn't matter where you stand on this. You should still be able to figure out that shutting down conversation like this is probably not the best move forward. Like, we should be able to have debates on all kinds of taboo subjects like immigration, like homosexuality, if you have some argument to make. So even though this case is over half a year old now, I'm still pissed off. I don't think this is a good sign that we have these witch hunts against people when they've just voiced opinions. And what were these opinions? Maybe I should just basically point out to everyone, if you are new to this subject, and maybe Alan said something very dramatic and radical, and deserved this backlash. Well, no, not really. Like, these are the three, I think, the most controversial statements by Alan. So Alan thinks that not all pedophiles are sex offenders. I think that's just a fact. That's completely reasonable. Alan thinks being pedophile is not immoral itself, but only acting on it. Now, this is something you could argue for and against, but again, is that really such a horrible, evil statement that you don't believe in thought crime? That you see a real difference between actually having a desire to do something? Let's say you have a BDSM fetish. Well, it's different from actually raping somebody. If you think so, you are an evil person. You need to be fired now. I think that's a reasonable statement, though of course we can argue about that, and in this response I'm going to talk about that subject as well. And then thirdly, Alan said we should use the word map, or we should consider using the word map, which means minor attracted people, as a substitute for the word pedophile because of its connotations and how people misunderstand the term. I mean, that's it. I mean, like, was some of those comments so radical that he needed to be fired because of that? We had to threaten him because Alan argued not all pedophiles are criminals. You're not even allowed to state such an opinion. Oh, fuck. Yeah, it's clown world. That's right. This is clown world. But I'm going to now take a look at Lauren's video. I have some clips. I don't respond to every single point she says because that would be redundant. So I think these are her main arguments. But if you think I missed some key talking point she raises, feel free to comment on the comment section, and we can discuss that. But I believe I've done an honest job trying to take the clips that basically represent her opinions on this matter, and then I'm going to critique them. So see how that goes.
There is a non-profit charity organization called Prostasia that I have done a video about before, and their entire goal is to destigmatize and legitimize MAPs, or minor attracted persons. That's the nice way of referring to pedophiles now. You can call pedophiles whatever you want, MAPs, some other type of cheery sounding term, but it's like ultimately what people object to is that attraction itself. So as long as it's there, you can try whatever PR branding you want. People aren't going to like it.
Lauren, MAP isn't a cheery sounding term. It's not a nice way of referring to pedophiles. It's at most a neutral way of referring to them. Like, when you break it down to its components, it just means minor attracted person or people. There's nothing cheery sounding about that. Like, how miserable your life must be if you are cheered up by that. When Lauren talks about Prostasia, the child protection organization or charity, she paraphrases their position by saying that their entire goal is to destigmatize pedophilia or legitimize it. In my opinion, there's a problem when you paraphrase it like that, because you make it sound like there's no reason why they would destigmatize or legitimize MAPs, that they are just doing it for lols or something. No, if you listen to their arguments, they believe that by destigmatizing being pedophile, they can encourage pedos to seek help, that they can make it more comfortable for them to seek help and disclose their sexuality because there's less stigma, so that they can get help for that, which means there would presumably be less sex crimes. So the entire goal is not just to destigmatize pedophilia, it's to reduce sex crimes, and that's the mechanism they are using in order to reduce sex crimes. And finally, when Lauren talks about the word map and the reasons why some activists are trying to introduce that word, she implies that they are trying to make people like pedophiles on some emotional level, when I think this is not true. I think it's more about trying to fix this language problem we have around this subject, where the word pedophile is so easily conflated with the word child molester, and they introduce the word map as a fix to that problem. So it's about getting people to use correct terminology and not miscategorize people who are attracted to children as something they are not.
Anyway, I mentioned them because this video once more brings us to a discussion of their disgusting activism. Apparently, they do interviews with different activists within the realm of people who are trying to side with pedophiles, humanize pedophiles. And they actually just this week did an interview with someone who is a professor at a university that has just published a book through a university press discussing all of the reasons why we should care more about the plight of the pedophile and why it's actually really harmful to pedophiles that we stigmatize them.
So apparently Lauren has a problem not only with siding with pedophiles, but also with just humanizing them, because she thinks, I guess, it's disgusting activism to try to humanize a minority. So what are we supposed to make of pedophiles then? They are cockroaches, they are bacteria. Like, do I have to explain what could be the problem when we start dehumanizing people? Like, humankind doesn't exactly have a great track record of when we dehumanize people, of that leading to any positive outcome. No, it usually leads to something we as members of human species are quite ashamed of about our history. Like, it's just, this rhetoric is just quite disturbing, to say that you shouldn't even humanize humans. Lauren talks about Alan here as well as the activist she mentions, that how Alan just wants to talk about stigmatization of maps and how harmful that is to maps. When again, that's not the whole story, because the idea is that the stigma against maps might actually affect children as well as potential victims. Like, let's say, because we have this stereotype that pedophiles are child molesters. Well, imagine if a pedophile starts believing in that stereotype himself and thinks that that's his destiny, that they have no real choice. And even when people do acknowledge the difference between a pedophile and child molester, there are so many people like Lauren who think that it doesn't matter anyway. It's something that we have to blame either way, whether they act on it or not. Like, when we have this kind of an atmosphere, it could actually cause more victims. Not to mention how more difficult it is for pedophiles to seek help in this kind of a lynching mentality atmosphere. So again, try to be honest how you paraphrase these things. It's not just about helping pedophiles or making pedophiles feel good. It's about, engineering a society where there are fewer sex crimes. We don't have to choose whether we are nice and kind to pedophiles or whether we protect children. In my opinion, like, the solution to accomplish one is to do the other. It's essentially that they go completely hand in hand. When we help pedophiles, we're going to help children. We're going to protect children. But because this is a humane way to deal with this subject, these fucking antis will never accept it. So, I mean, in my opinion, it just feels that they don't even care about children's welfare because their policies suck. They are based on bigotry, not based on any kind of a real solution.
I use the term minor attracted person, or MAP, in the title and throughout the book for multiple reasons. First of all, because I think it's important to use terminology for groups that members of that group want others to use for them. And MAP advocacy groups like Before You Act have advocated for use of the term MAP. They've advocated for it primarily because it's less stigmatizing than other terms like pedophile. A lot of people, when they hear the term pedophile, they automatically assume that it means a sex offender. And that isn't true, and it leads to a lot of misconceptions about attractions toward minors.
So he's just saying, oh, well, I'm just using the term map because that's what pedophiles like to be referred to as, and I like to use terms to refer to people that they are comfortable with. I guarantee you, like 100,000, 5,000,000%, this is the type of person, Alan, right here, who has no problem referring to someone like Kyle Rittenhouse as a white supremacist, Proud Boys as like racist neo-Nazis, you name it. So, I mean, I might be going out on a limb here.
Yeah, are you done making stuff up? Obviously, Lauren doesn't know how Alan would refer to Kyle Rittenhouse or Proud Boys. Like, this is funny how anti Lauren is against these different minorities, and yet she has all this empathy, this wealth of compassion toward Kyle Rittenhouse and Proud Boys. They are the true victims here. Anyway, but let's say Alan did think Kyle is Nazi and Proud Boys are fucking bigots or something. How is that a counter argument to what Alan says? That seems like a two wrongs make a right fallacy, where you disregard valid criticism by pointing to a similar wrong action committed by your opponent or someone else. You still haven't addressed Alan's point that it's problematic to use language that's stigmatizing. It's problematic to miscategorize people.
And also something that pedophile advocates constantly say is that, well, we can't use the term pedophile anymore because people often wrongly associate pedophilia, which is attraction to minors, with actual, action. And I don't think that's the case. I think people know that pedophilia is just talking about the attraction, but the thing is, like, people aren't stupid. They understand that if you're attracted to a child, you're probably more likely to abuse a child. Like, this is a very reasonable leap of logic that people have taken.
Wait, so Lauren says that people don't really associate pedophilia with child molestation, and then she associates pedophilia with child molestation herself and says this is what people do because they are not stupid. What? So do people associate pedophilia with child molestation, or do they not? Which one is it? Because that literally made no sense what you did there. But anyway, like, this is what, like who are you arguing against anyway? Alan didn't say the problem is people associate pedophilia with child molestation. This is what Alan, in fact, said in the clip you just played.
A lot of people, when they hear the term pedophile, they automatically assume that it means a sex offender. And that isn't true, and it leads to a lot of misconceptions about attractions toward minors.
You are once again, you are misparaphrasing people here. The problem is when people equate the word pedophile and child molester. The problem isn't when people associate these different things, because I do associate them myself as well. Like, I understand that statistically there's more pedophiles, I guess, commit sex crimes. Like, statistically on group level, I would say that's true. So no one is saying the problem is this association. The problem is when people equate the concepts. Now I'm going to do something you probably will never encounter in a Lauren video, like ever. And I'm going to be very generous with her argument there, because I'm going to give her the benefit of the doubt. Like, maybe she just misspoke there. Like, this is what you're supposed to do when you critique people, ideally. You don't make straw men and make their arguments worse or leave out some crucial information. If you are going to alter their arguments when you critique them, the only way you're allowed to do that, I think, is when you make them better, when you make them even stronger, the position even stronger. So let's just assume Lauren misspoke and she meant to say that people don't really equate the word pedophile and child molester. But that's still wrong, Lauren. So I think it was my second video that I made where I recounted this incident where I went to my local library, or the main library of my city. It's not an academic library though, but rather a public one. I went there to basically investigate how the psychology books there define the word pedophile. I wanted to know how bad it is. And I kid you not, all the psychology books I could find, I didn't find that too many, like, I don't know, 5, 6, a little more, I guess. I don't really remember, it's been a couple of years, but all of them define pedophile as a child molester. To say that people don't conflate the two, they do. And obviously, there are these studies about stigmatization of pedophilia, where they ask these respondents about their opinions or their attitudes toward pedophiles. And in those studies, they clarify to the respondent what they mean by the word pedophile. And they are very, very careful to basically elucidate the fact that it doesn't mean child molester. And then you could talk about all those articles which humanize pedophiles. Basically, there are plenty of them around. So they also do the same thing. They clarify what the word pedophile means. So if there's no confusion around these concepts, why do they do that? So obviously, let's not be in denial here. People do conflate the word pedophile and child molester and think that they are synonyms. They do it all over the place, and that's part of the problem.
From my perspective, there is no morality or immorality attached to attraction to anyone because no one can control who they're attracted to at all. In other words, it's not who we're attracted to that's either okay or not okay. It's our behaviors in responding to that attraction that are either okay or not okay.
What I want you to be aware of, be very consciously aware of throughout this little interview that was done, is the way that Alan uses language that is very heavily favored by LGBT groups in order to refer to pedophiles. So one of the things that was frequently said in order to kind of mainstream the idea that homosexuality is okay, it's natural, it's not something that should be fought against, is the concept that you don't choose your sexual attraction, therefore it cannot be immoral. So when I hear a pedophile advocacy group try to say that, oh, it's not immoral to merely be attracted to children, red flag, like alarm going off in my head, I immediately know it's because they're trying to justify that it isn't inherently wrong to be sexually attracted to children because, hey, I can't control my feelings and I'm not actually acting on it.
Well, yeah, it's just the fact that there are some points that can be made that apply to both the condition of being a pedophile and the condition of being a gay person. Like, for example, they don't choose their sexuality, that it's the condition is something that appears to be immutable, that conversion therapies don't work for them. But let's see how Lauren responds to Alan, because she is of different opinion. Like, no surprise, she thinks it is immoral. So let's hear her arguments.
I very much disagree that it's not wrong just to be attracted to children, because think about it. If it's not wrong to simply be attracted to children, then why should people seek help for that attraction? Think about it. We only go to counseling when something is like mentally not okay with us. So these people try to argue that by destigmatizing this attraction, we can actually inspire more pedophiles to get help. But it's like, if there's nothing wrong with that attraction, what is the impetus for getting help?
I don't know if you noticed what happened there. It's not easy to spot, but Lauren is using the word wrong in different sense than what Alan is using it for. When Alan says it's okay to be a pedophile, because Alan is talking about the morality of it. Alan is using the word okay in purely moral sense, not in any other sense, but just moral sense. Lauren's interpretation of this is that Alan is supposedly saying there couldn't be anything problematic about being a pedophile, something you could potentially need help for, when that's definitely not what Alan said, because Alan is again talking about only the morality of it.
And you know what? We see that over time, as things like homosexuality or gender dysphoria have, been okayed by society as not morally wrong, then they have been removed from like psychiatric or psychologist manuals as actual disorders, meaning that it is no longer a valid reason to go to a therapist if you are experiencing same-sex attraction. I don't know how you guys feel, but I could give a rat's ass if a pedophile feels like he's a bad person because he's attracted to kids, because quite frankly, I think that is something that you should feel bad about. And if there's no stigma around that feeling, like I mentioned before, there is no impetus to get help, because why would you seek therapy over something that's not wrong in the first place?
Okay, Lauren is being massively clueless here. So I'm going to explain why. Like, gender dysphoria is a horrible example in support of her position. While it's true, it's not considered immoral. It's not considered a sickness or a disorder. People still seek treatment for that. I mean, they seek treatment because they want to transition. Gender dysphoria, by definition and by the very nature of the condition, is a problem for these people. It's a discrepancy between like what sex they feel they belong to and their biological makeup, and they seek help for that because they want to transition. That's the whole. So obviously we don't have to consider a condition immoral for these people to seek help. So this is a horrible example by her. Then what about homosexuality, which was her second example? Well, I mean, there are differences clearly between being gay and being a pedophile. So even if generally gays don't need any help, that might not apply to pedophiles. Some pedophiles could need help because it's more challenging, that kind of a life, because they have fewer ethical outlets. They can't express their sexuality as freely. So yeah, while there are similarities, you can't just think that the analogy between being gay and being pedophile applies in all cases, because there are differences that you must appreciate. It really is such an insanely, like unbelievably dumb claim by her to suggest that we have to stigmatize the condition in order to make people with that condition seek help. Like, here's a thought experiment. Let's imagine some kind of a weird-ass society where having toothache is stigmatized. People with toothache are considered evil motherfuckers, like possessed kind of evil. Now, according to Lauren's logic, if we should remove stigma from toothache in such a society, that would mean people with toothache wouldn't seek a dentist anymore to fix their teeth. Like, what sense does that make? Just because you think you have a problem that you need help for, it's got nothing to do with whether you must feel that it's immoral, that it makes you a bad person morally somehow. Another example would be depression. People who are depressed are kind of stigmatized to an extent in our society, but certainly we don't argue that we need more stigma. Usually the idea is that in order to make them seek help better and in general just improve their condition, we have to reduce stigma. Optimally, we should get rid of the stigma altogether. No one is saying that there's a problem because people who are depressed don't seek help, and to solve this issue we have to fucking consider them, we have to dehumanize them. Like, no one is suggesting that kind of a fucking solution to the problem. But with pedophilia, somehow she thinks that stigma is the way that makes them seek help, when we know from research, from actually objective research and science, that the effect of stigma is exactly the opposite. It works as an obstacle to help-seeking behavior. We know from surveys that like number 1, 2, 3 reason, that like the first reasons why a pedophile hasn't sought help is because of stigma. So it's just so backwards that this person thinks that the effect of stigma is exactly the opposite, when all the research shows it's not. That it's something we don't want. You know, especially if we want to reduce sex crimes. We don't want to make pedophiles' mental health any worse by bullying them and trampling on them, you know, endlessly for something they didn't even choose, something they can't even help.
I think these activists know this. I think they know that the first step to mainstreaming a behavior is to destigmatize just like the mere feeling of it. I think they see the roadmap that was taken by LGBT activists and they are trying to follow it. Just to be like on the up and up, I did want to include that clip of this person saying that sexual abuse against children is not okay. But you know what? Even though that is like the minimum like condemnation that you could possibly say when talking about pedophiles, I'm pretty sure that the next step of this argument is to try to distinguish non-consenting children from consenting children and say that, like, well, it's not always sexual abuse if the kid is in on it, which of course is nonsense, but I'm pretty sure like that's that step, whatever number step they're on.
I think it's clear by now that Lauren doesn't have a real counter-argument to anything Alan really says, because she has to resort to making things up like this. Lauren even played a clip of Alan denouncing child-adult sex there, but she's going to make the accusation anyway that Alan has a secret agenda, that Alan really wants to mainstream the behavior, to use her words, which is like, this is not just her misparaphrasing something or just strawmanning something. This is a serious slander and lie. to imply that someone is in favor of child molestation when they've never said any such thing. You could even imagine that there might be some people in Lauren's audience who might not apply too much critical thinking as they are watching the video, and by the time they've done watching her video, they might have this wrong impression that Alan is in fact just advocating for child molestation because that's the accusation Lauren has. And imagine after that the person might assault Alan based on this completely wrong impression. So it's extremely dangerous to imply that someone is in favor of child molestation when they've never ever made any such remarks. And I'm baffled, like, how can Lauren get away with this? Like, why aren't there more people calling her out on this, that she's lying about people now? Like, this is not any fallacy. This is just her making things up as she goes in her paranoid little head. It's fucking disgusting. I could use this argument against her and her conservative buddies by saying something like, if you are against gay marriage, that's just the first step. You don't really just want that. You want more. You want there to be extermination camps for people who are attracted to the same sex. It never ever implied that this is what you really want, but I'm just going to assume that as a secret agenda for you, because I just make things up as I go. Like, that's so fucking dishonest that I'm sickened, actually. And, you know, you may hear from my voice that I am sickened as I'm making this response. Because this is too much bullshit that I have to go through as I respond to this fucking imbecile.
And don't get me wrong, I'm sure that, there is on the planet out there somewhere a person who has pedophilic attractions but has not acted on them. But it's like, I mean, think about this. Imagine the fact that priests are not supposed to act on any sexual attraction. How well or how poorly that goes. And it's actually a joke that obviously, chastity is not something that these men are going to be able to keep. Now, we can go back and forth on how often those vows are broken. But my point is, like, if we don't trust people who have regular heterosexual, attraction to adults to be able to keep chaste and away from their sexual desires, why would we give any more credence to the character or to the ability to control themselves to pedophiles? It doesn't make sense.
Even though I've been pretty hostile this entire response to her, I think I must give some credit to her as well here, because credit must be given where credit is due. And it's basically because she's doing something honest here, I think. She's trying to just make her case. She believes most pedophiles offend, or that we should expect them to offend. I happen to disagree, but she's not misparaphrasing anyone. She's not being dishonest. She's just arguing what I think is her sincere position. So that's one of the better sections of her video, I think. But I have two problems with this analogy where she compares the condition of being a priest in celibacy to the condition of being a responsible pedophile who doesn't offend. The first one is that she doesn't really provide any statistics to show that most priests can't live in celibacy. She points out to the fact that it's kind of a joke, priests in celibacy, but this is different from demonstrating that most priests are in fact incapable of doing that. You could even imagine that, like, when there are priests, because of course there are some priests who break celibacy, who break their vows of chastity. You could understand that this is probably, we focus disproportionately to these cases, I imagine, because they are scandalous. These priests are doing something they aren't supposed to do, so we pay more attention to those incidents. Whereas maybe the vast majority of priests, Catholic priests, I guess that's what we should talk about when we talk about chastity. I think maybe the vast majority of them can keep their vows of chastity. Like, I don't have the numbers, but it's her. Like, she has the burden of proof when she's going to use this analogy to demonstrate something like most pedophiles will offend. And if this is a correct analogy, she should basically demonstrate that most priests can't live in celibacy. And this gets us to my second problem with this analogy, which is that I don't believe it's a perfect analogy, because when we talk about these priests in celibacy, it means perfect sexual abstinence for them. They can't get married, they can't masturbate, I'm not expert on theology by any means, but I believe it's the idea of sin. I mean, like what's sinful is mostly the mere thought, the mere feeling, which is considered most offensive, the sexual feeling, which is considered most offensive to God. So priests can't have any sexual outlets. Whereas if you are a pedophile who must live responsibly, they can still have outlets which are ethical. Most pedophiles are actually not exclusive, meaning they could have sex with adults and find that pleasurable. They could even do some age play, whatever works for them. It's just that they can't have sex with kids, like obviously. But they can certainly masturbate. I'm not going to go into graphic detail about how people express their sexuality, even if they are not able to have sexual relations with the type of person that they would most prefer. So it still works out as long as they have outlets. Like, all I mean is that the condition of living in sexual abstinence as a priest is much more difficult than the condition of living responsibly as a pedophile. So anyway, that's the dissimilarity. Anyway, despite all of this, Lauren still seems convinced that we don't trust people to be able to control their sexual behavior. But is this really the case when we think about people generally? Like, if we have a straight male who's single, doesn't have sexual relations, doesn't do prostitution, do we think that this person is necessarily a threat to women, that they will offend someday, that we can't leave the guy alone with women? I don't think most people believe that we don't control our sexuality, our sexual behavior. It's just that when we think about pedophiles, we somehow forget that they might have these things like morality and impulse control and empathy for children, and even protective instinct for children. Like, I have suggested in my videos this one theory that maybe it's because of the horn effect, which is the opposite of the halo effect, where we in the horn effect you see pedophilia as this negative trait, and you assume that pedophiles are deficient in these other domains, that they can't have something like empathy for children. But it's biased. It's not based on evidence to make that assumption. So yeah, I disagree with Lauren when she says that we don't trust people generally to be able to control control behavior that's based on these crude impulses. And basically there's even one strong biological argument to be made about this. Like, because we humans have this one brain area called prefrontal cortex, and it's highly developed in humans. And it's basically one of the things that sets us apart from wild animals who are more like slaves to their impulses. And I'm going to read out from the wiki page about prefrontal cortex to just show that it's biological. You can make a biological argument that, like, if someone feels some kind of an impulse, they still, generally speaking, have the choice whether they act on it or not. This brain region has been implicated in executive functions such as planning, decision-making, short-term memory, personality expression, moderating social behavior, and controlling certain aspects of speech and language. Executive functions relates to abilities to differentiate among conflicting thoughts, determine good and bad, better and best, same and different, future consequences of current activities, working toward a defined goal, prediction of outcomes, expectation based on actions, and social control, the ability to suppress urges that, if not suppressed, could lead to socially unacceptable outcomes. I guess I will add here at the end just one bit, just as a caveat. Lauren talks about trusting pedophiles, and my opinion on this is basically that I don't demand anyone to trust anyone else. If you can't trust a pedophile, then you can't. It's a feeling in your head, and it would be silly to say that you must trust someone when you feel you can't trust them. So it's not about making people trust pedophiles. It's mostly, in my opinion, to hope that people don't miscategorize pedophiles as offenders or ticking time bombs, or assume something like they will offend or that they couldn't control their sexuality. Because these are the problems when we slander this population and think they can be all labeled based on the worst examples of this population. So I just want to be clear, I don't demand anyone to trust a pedophile if they can't. So let's move on now.
What concerns me about the way that Alan talks, and even just the way that Prostasia operates in general, is that you can see that the concern is really for the well-being of the pedophile, and they may occasionally try to cloak it in language of, oh, and this actually also helps victims, but I think at the end of the day, we know where these people's concerns are, and it's not with the children, it is with the pedophiles. No matter how loud the warning signs are, there are people who are going to watch this and still think this is only fear-mongering, that I'm just being hyperbolic, but it's like, I don't know what more I can do to show you guys that this is a problem, this is real, this is happening, this is becoming mainstream, and, we cannot let these people prey on feelings of empathy because they will absolutely take it way too far. So
Preying on our empathy. I wonder where we heard that before.
And do not be mistaken, the LGBT community ain't having that shit. They know they are snakes trying to co-opt their movement, preying on people's empathy and tolerance.
So apparently Lauren watches Shu's videos, and here she has copied one of Shu's rhetorical points that pedos or activists are preying on our empathy. Now, it's okay to take someone's argument and then use it yourself if you think someone makes a valid point, but that's the thing, you should at least make sure that it's a valid point and not fallacious one, because the thing is, loaded language is fallacious. Those terms, cloaking someone's language or preying on our empathy, they are not neutral terms, they have evaluative meanings, and it's fallacious to use them if you are not going to demonstrate that there is something like a secret agenda or insincerity or sinister motives at play. So this is where we are at with these antis. They copy each other's fallacies now. These conservative fucktards are so unoriginal that they can't come up with fallacies by themselves. Like, this is so dumb, you can't make this up. Maybe some of you watching this are still thinking that maybe Lauren has a point here concerning this slippery slope, where you think that maybe we shouldn't risk it. We shouldn't tolerate pedophiles, even the non-offending ones, because of the possible risk that our society will degenerate into accepting child-adult sex. So maybe you still think this is somehow a realistic fear, when in my opinion it's not. I understood at some point that this is a very recurring argument among antis, so I made this image to basically just demonstrate why this slippery slope fallacy falls apart. You can pause the video if you want and read from the image. I'm not going to read it, I'm going to paraphrase very, very quickly and then move on with the video. But basically I just argue there that if it's an objective fact that it's harmful to kids to have sex with adults, then there's no chance that a scientific community would change regarding this. Like, the consensus is that it's harmful to kids. If that is a factual reality, then there will not be enough studies to persuade a scientific community to basically do a complete paradigm shift and change their consensus, which is the first step. I'm talking about steps here as well because conservatives like this steps analogy, so I'm using it as well here. And that wouldn't even be enough. The public would have to be in on it as well. This is not going to happen. The paradigm shift is not going to happen if it's actually harmful to kids to have sex with adults. The only scenario, the hypothetical scenario where I can conceive of the possibility of our society changing as regards to this in 1,000 years or so, is where sex between adults and children is not harmful. And that's the only scenario where I can think of that there would be enough studies to persuade the scientific community to change their position on this, and for the public to somehow vote for these politicians that are for abolishing age of consent. And it's not even a worst case scenario, because if you legalize something that's not actually harmful objectively, then there's no problem in the first place. But I want to make clear, I think it's harmful. I think kids can't consent to sex. But either way, whether you think it's harmful or not, it's just an objectively demonstrated fact that this slippery slope theory is garbage. It's fucking absolute garbage, and antis should move on. They should stop using this. They should never think about this. And I'm quite sick and tired of it as well, because, like, come up with something new. Come up with something that actually makes sense as an argument against pedophiles, and let's move on.
And frankly, in 2021, I think we do have enough data on how destigmatizing behaviors goes. And you can't deny that destigmatizing something leads to more of it, leads to the mainstreaming of it. I mean, just think about it. Not that long ago in the United States, you didn't even have gay marriage. Now there is an entire gay pride month that corporations are on board with. A drag queen story hour is in schools. Children are being given puberty blockers because they identify as trans.
Yeah, but Lauren, listen, we aren't talking about destigmatizing any behavior. We're talking about destigmatizing potentially the attraction to children. This is like one of the similarities between being gay and being pedo. It's, again, like I mentioned before, it's not something they choose. It's in fact something it appears they are largely born with. It's biologically hardwired in their brain to a large extent. So this just means that even if we normalize and glorify and support it and do whatever, we are not going to cause more of it, because just like we don't cause less of it by hating on pedophiles. Otherwise, that's like saying if we glorify being tall, that's going to mean that there's going to be more tall people in our society walking around. That makes no sense. It's not going to happen. Now, it is true that, like, if we tolerate like gays or trans people, we're going to see them more in the public. Like, there's going to be prides in countries where being gay is acceptable. But the thing is, you don't in fact cause more gays. You're just going to make them come out of the closet because they don't have to fear judgmental attitudes. I'm sure you've heard this argument before. It just seems that way, that there are more gays because we tolerate them. Their numbers are probably exactly the same. It's just that they are not in the closet anymore.
I'm going to break the molds of like acceptable discourse nowadays and say that actually stigma is good sometimes. Sometimes we do need stigma. We need shame to control our behaviors, because not every behavior is okay. And heck, not even every feeling is okay. And we should be working on ourselves, even just from within, to try to control our animal urges. And that first starts with controlling or trying to better manage our feelings.
You mean those animal urges you just previously said that we can't control, that priests can't stay away from their sexual nature? Then now all of a sudden it's expected that people control their behavior. I mean, I'm glad you're actually just conceding the point that pedophiles don't have to offend, I guess. But you're being inconsistent. Anyway, she still insists on this idea that we have to stigmatize the feeling. I guess she has some vague idea that if we don't stigmatize the feeling, we have difficulties stigmatizing the behavior, when that's not the case. I mean, I've used this example before. The law is a good demonstration of the fact that we can create deterrence against certain acts, such as child molestation, even when we don't persecute people for the corresponding thought crime. So this just demonstrates that we can have deterrence against harmful actions, even when we don't, even when we aren't like thought policing here. And I would say that if we were thought policing pedophiles and we were saying that it's immoral to just be a pedo, I would argue that there's a very, very big danger there, because we are blurring the distinction between the choice of acting on it unethically and controlling that desire. Because when we are saying that it doesn't matter either way, like they are bad people either way, we are actually giving them less incentive to control it. Like, think about it. So yeah, that was the last clip. I'm glad it's over. I may make more videos about Lauren in the future, because she has more videos about this, but I'm glad this is now done. I feel that this had to be done, but I also want to apologize because I was very hostile. Like, if you are a Lawrence fan, you probably didn't like this video, and that's partly my fault, in the sense that I wasn't too friendly. I was very, very angry. I was very hostile, because I genuinely feel sickened when I'm making these responses to some of these worst antis. I personally am not a huge fan of this idea where you take a minority that has barely any representation in our society. This group of people who have no political allies, really, Barely anyone dares to speak in defense of them, and if they do with their own identity, they will be they will be targets of this kind of a witch hunt. People threaten them, they try to get them fired, and when you are doing this, when you are spreading this hatred to your hundreds of thousands of subs, and you are trying to profit off of that, like there's even this one point in Lauren's video where she complains amidst her bigoted messaging how difficult it is to monetize videos like that. I just feel like I feel sickened as I'm listening to her. But I also want to thank you if you watched this far. It was my longest video, I believe. So if you watched this far, amazing, great. So yeah, not more to add. That's all I have. Thanks for listening.